Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of IHL in Film. I am your host, Ovais Anwar. Today we are reviewing All Quiet on the Western Front, which is on Netflix. Definitely do give it a watch. It's a really interesting movie.
Yeah.
As always, I have with me Aisha Malik, who is team lead of our Conflict Law Center here at RSIL. Aisha, how did you find the movie?
I really like the movie. I don't generally watch war films, as we know, but this was a really, really good one. I think this one and 1917, the one about the letter, I thought that was one of my favorite movies. But this one was also, I really, really liked it. I liked the... I actually like that they went into the logistics of war, which you don't usually see. So it started with the laundry scene, where they're taking the uniforms off the dead soldiers and then they're, redoing them up and sending them on to the new recruits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what really struck me was that the boys who were recruited into the army, who signed up, they kind of enlisted as if they were going on like a boys' trip. Like it felt like they were going on like a boys' camping trip. They were like trying on the clothes. Being
Super
like,
excited about it. They really wanted to.
Yeah. And then he was just like, oh wait, this belongs to someone else. And they were just like, oh no, it probably just got, mixed up. And you're like, that guy died. Like we just saw him die in the opening and then you're now wearing the uniform.
No. Absolutely. And I mean, one thing that I really enjoyed about this is that, we're getting... war movies more and more which are about individual experiences, this and that. This was an epic, right? This was that large scale thing. Of course, you're going into the story of these individuals who are there, especially this one particular protagonist who's in it, but you get this wonderful bird's eye view of what's happening, the decision decision making that's happening at with the generals, the armistice that is being negotiated.
That was so horrible to see. These men kind of negotiating off just around a table and talking about, okay, in 72 hours and what can happen in 72 hours. And you see the main characters of the film that you'd follow just die within that time. Exactly.
No, absolutely. So Aisha, looking at this from an IHL perspective, because we kind of have to do that as part of the show, right? I mean, just reviewing the movie would have been fun in itself, but from the IHL perspective, are there particular areas? I know being a World War I movie, we are going to find quite a few IHL violations. Before we address that, is the IHL that applied during World War I the same that we see today?
No, it's not, because this is pre the Geneva Conventions.
Okay.
So certain aspects of it did apply during this.
Course.
So especially the Hague Regulations from 1907, they applied. It's very interesting, their application, because they still apply today in terms of occupied territory. So it is really funny looking at this as World War I trench warfare. It is nothing like a battlefield that we would see today. And yet, in terms of an occupation, we still have that law applying today.
Absolutely.
So one of the bits that I was like, I was watching, and when you're just like, this is why being a war lawyer, you watch these movies just so differently. It's when they were stealing, it comes up occupied territory. So I'm like, okay, laws of occupation immediately apply. And then they go and steal a goose. And they go away, they enter this French farmhouse. They steal a goose, they nearly get killed because the farmer comes out and tries to shoot them and they're running away. And then they have like a nice jolly dinner where they're actually eating for the first time properly. And I was like, oh my God, this is your token. If a combatant steals a loaf of bread in occupied territory, it's that example. And that came out in the Tadic case. So in Tadic, the appeals chamber actually considered that as an example. They said, okay, if a combatant were to steal a loaf of bread in occupied territory, because that would amount to pillage. And it would be a violation of Article 46.1 of the Hague Regulations, which says that private property is to be respected.
Absolutely.
And would that be a serious violation of IHL? And we know that serious violations of IHL are war crimes. So they're looking at whether that would be a war crime. And I remember watching that being like, wait, was it a war crime or wasn't it? And then I went back and I was like, they decided it wouldn't be a war crime to steal a loaf of bread.
It wouldn't reach the threshold of serious, grave serious violation.
So it would be an IHL violation. So you violated the laws of war in the sense that you've stolen a goose that you shouldn't have from an aspect of private property, but it wouldn't amount to being a war crime.
And so the redressal for something like this would be disciplinary action within the military's own mechanism.
And also interestingly, you also had Article 3 of the Hague Regulations, which in terms of if you have been found to be responsible, you have to pay compensation.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so they would have had to pay compensation.
That's really interesting.
Like Germany would have had to pay on behalf of France for this,
A goose.
for the taking of the goose. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But that's really interesting to see that it's usually an issue of degree of severity, right? When it comes to IHL and it's international thing, and we're often always talking about really severe events. Warfare is a severe event, right? And actions taking place there. But within warfare, there is such a wide array of wrongful action that wouldn't necessarily maybe reach the threshold of international. It wouldn't trigger international mechanisms, perhaps, or liability in that sense. But it certainly would do it within the armed forces' own ranks and within their own mechanisms.
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
And especially when we look at the Rome Statute, it's really there in terms of the scale and gravity of the offense committed. So it wouldn't be for very low-level offenses like this. They're like, okay, clear that in your own armed forces. That's what you court-martial your own officers for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else that you found particularly interesting that we should discuss?
Yeah, so there was that scene. So they were wearing those World War I gas masks in that scene. And then they enter and they're looking for these missing servicemen, and they enter the room and they find all of them there, about 60 of them, they're dead. And they realize that actually they took their masks off too early, and they're like, damn, they took their masks off too early. And they were exposed. I guess it is to asphyxiating gases, which means that they die, because mustard gas was really often used in World War I, but it doesn't cause this. It causes other issues, which
burning of the trachea and
which lasts for like a long time. And it's not necessarily a killing gas like this would be. And the irony is that it was actually Germany who used chlorine gas first in World War I, and then it became quite common, and they were using that. The most common was mustard gas. And then you had the Geneva Gas Protocol in 1925, which banned the use of these gases, and also ordered states had to destroy their stockpiles and all of that. And then I kind of thought that the use of gas was something which was used in both World Wars, but apparently by World War II, they didn't use gas much. There were very, very isolated incidents of the use of gas. So the Japanese used it in some way against the Chinese, but beyond that, you really didn't have it.
I mean, the famous incidents that we do know is the Nazis using it in concentration camps, right?
Right.
And use of that for those purposes, extermination and whatnot. But on the battlefield, on the battlefield, I don't think there was prevalent use of that. Throughout, absolutely. But it is really, really interesting to see, because we have far more World War II movies. A greater visual understanding of World War II, but seeing World War I trench warfare, that is a brutal thing.
For me, what got me was the title scenes at the end, where you had it written that 13 million people died there over like just hundreds of meters of ground. The front lines didn't really change. Absolutely. And it's just extraordinary that could happen.
No, absolutely. The last scene of Blackadder, where they're...
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen Blackadder?
No.
And you speak with that accent and you still have not seen it.
I actually don't watch that many English shows.
But British, I don't know, I just find them wonderful. Blackadder, just because one, it's a classic, and secondly, that their last scene is where they're it's a comedy show, and they've gone through the entire season joking around this and that, dry English humor and all that. But the final scene is they're all lined up to go over the trench, and that means certain death. Right? It's almost always a suicide mission, right? And that's where your 13 million died just going over that, right? So and that's always been my understanding of trench warfare, where it's men who know they're going to their death, and they still. Do it. And that's why you had so many incidents of people shooting themselves in the leg, or people trying to get out of that situation, because it was clearly suicide missions that they were almost always on. So World War I, I think visually speaking, it takes a lot to really understand that, and that's really how wars have been fought for since the invention of gunpowder and weapons like that.
And it was so interesting seeing them take off the dog tags.
Oh yeah.
So in terms of they were just like, okay, start collecting, and they would go and take off everyone's dog tags. And I didn't realize until I read about the film afterwards that the last scene was very pivotal, because he takes the scarf that he had, but he doesn't take off his dog tag. So actually his death would have been unrecorded. But it's one of those really poignant scenes where you realize that actually, oh, this is how the logistics like of war work, in the sense that you take off the dog tags, you write to the families, that's what you do for each other's servicemen. And there's someone there who has just got out of battle and has to go and collect them. And the kid was like a teenager going and collecting everyone's.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really does help you understand the brutality of war, especially World War I movies. And this one in particular, I think it was beautifully shot. It had a very strong, lasting presence, at least in my mind. I saw it a few weeks ago. But it was an overall, I think, a really, really good way of how they did it. It's interesting coming from, German cinema like that. Yeah. So that was
apparently
great.
It's quite criticized as well by Germany.
It's based on a
by
book.
German critics.
Yeah, it's based on a book. The book was an anti-war book. But I don't see why it was criticized that as much.
Maybe it wasn't as good as the book, in that they've taken out a few scenes, and especially because the book kind of goes into how these men go back, and even when they go back on leave, they're like, I can't reintegrate into normal life, which is such an issue. And you get that with the latrine scene where he's talking about going back to his family and how he might not like it, and he's worried, and you get that sense of camaraderie and community with them as well, and you're like, oh, it would be so hard for you to reintegrate back into regular life.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Aisha. I think this was a really interesting movie to discuss. Viewers, if you have any comments on this, please do let us know in the comments. Thank you very much.